So, big data. I think a lot of people are, they looked at big data sort of as a magic bullet. They have it up and running, and sometimes it doesn't always perform exactly as expected. I guess what I would ask the four of you is, what is a typical confusion? What is a typical, challenge or sticking point for companies as they mine their big data applications for insight? What confuses them? What challenges them most often? Donna, what's your sense of that? What's a confusion that people are dealing with big data?
Yeah, I think, depending on where, some of our customers are, a lot of the confusion is really sort of where to start in many cases. I understand that there's some strategic value in accessing this big data that I have but where do I start and what's the right place to begin? And then along with that, once you've identified, maybe it's, I want to reduce customer churn, or there's just some basic cost reduction I want to do in terms of data storage or meeting my SLAs, then it's really all about, okay, now I've done that, I've identified that problem, and then how do I really approach that? I've got existing technologies in place. I need to be looking at new technologies. Some of them aren't very mature. How do I sort out sort of the fact from fiction? So there's a lot of, I think, those are kind of the biggest challenges that we see.
Sanjay, we talked about this a little bit. I think it seems like one of the confusions is knowing what question to ask. Is that one of the things that trips people up, or what do you see as a big challenge with big data?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think one of the, and I think Donna hit on it as well, which is where do I start? And there are two ways of thinking about it. One is if you have specific questions in mind, or specific hypotheses in mind that you need to test and questions you need to answer, then that's one thing. But a lot of times people ask themselves, hey, let the data tell me what's going on. And that's challenging in and of itself, because where do you start, to Donna's point? And our belief is that there are times when having a very defined rule set, a very defined set of questions is relevant if you know what the data is and you constrain the data to be about the question. And there are times when that's too limiting, when in fact you're over-optimizing, and sometimes you need to let the data inform you about things you didn't know.
Is there a rule of thumb to know when you are over-optimizing or putting too many rules in place, or is it very situational?
I think it's situational. I don't know if there's a specific rule of thumb that you can apply to every customer and every vertical.
Right.
But oftentimes what happens when we talk with our customers is when they start telling us, oh, I discovered ABC and I didn't know it was there, and then you automatically understand that the rules are over-optimized.
Huh. Mike, your sense of a big challenge or something that trips people up with big data, what's confusing people?
We tend to talk to a lot of folks on the enterprise infrastructure side, and certainly it matters whether their users are trying to do things in a cheaper way or look for key insight, or they're building an operational advantage application. But on the enterprise side, we see this really confusion on Hadoop being a batch time process for most folks when they just roll it out, and they're really looking for an interactive or more of a real-time kind of answer, and they have to look beyond Hadoop sometimes or to add on applications or value. So that's one confusion, is people don't quite understand what Hadoop was really designed for as its sweet spot and what takes additional applications. Another thing we see is storage. Big data, it seems like there's commodity disk and commodity disk and commodity disk, and it scales cheaply. But a lot of times the data that has to go in there is already existent in another system. It has to be protected. It has to be replicated. It has to be secured. And there's a lot that goes into actually the storage side of it beyond simply saying we're just going to use commodity disks. So.
You mean there's an entirely different approach to big data storage as opposed to regular storage?
Well, true. So in big data and Hadoop in particular, you tend to use the Hadoop solution, which is HDFS, or Hadoop's distributed file system, and that's built on the cluster itself using just the direct disks on each server node in the cluster, and it replicates the data on there. And you don't really have a storage array. You don't have a third-party storage if you're going with that commodity solution for Hadoop, which is very cost-effective. But at the same time, if you don't have external storage, you don't have a storage array, you don't have a storage admin, you're going to be missing these other enterprise features of reliability and availability and data protection. So that can really trip people up. So,
Joel, your sense of what confuses people when they get up and running with a big data application?
Well, I don't know that many people think they are up and running with a big data application. I think the challenge is people get these, they do have to have a goal, they have to know what they're looking for, but once they find it, they have to be able to do something about it at the speed of the internet. And you know, most people have started with what data can I now access and analyze, but it's all looking backwards. And there's a lot to learn from history, as your bookshelf often points out. But there is, everybody wants to know, what do I do right now, and how do I get that done? And so when you think about big data, you actually have to not only think about the storage and the rationalization of the data, as Mike said, and what's the right question, as Sanjay and Donna said, but you have to think about, what do I do with the answers, and how do I act on them? And then, is my big data system a learning system that will adapt based on what it observes from the actions I took from what I gleaned from it?
Right. I think a lot of, I'm sure some businesses get into a sticky situation where, you know, the human hunch tells them one thing, but suddenly the answers that the big data application spits out suggests another thing. So they may have to go against their hunch at times.
You know, it's interesting. There's been some research that came out in the last month or so that actually did testing on outcomes. The human hunch, machine only, and it actually was in the Harvard Business Review. And what they also tested was machine-driven, human refined. And it turns out that human versus machine, machine will win.
Right.
Machine with human refined beats machine.